And a coalition of Minnesota's largest employers issued a joint appeal calling for de-escalation amid protests. Joining us to discuss is Will Hild, Executive Director of Consumers Research. So, Will, good afternoon. Always good to have you on the show. Now, the CEOs of 60 corporations, that's including Best Buy, Target, General Mills, they represent billions in market cap coming together like this. What is your perspective on this? Does this signal anything?
Yeah, I think it signals a marked difference from the way that a lot of corporations reacted several previous times when far left political activists would try to demand that they, take sides in a heated political debate. We saw this when there was the George controversy around George Floyd. We saw this when Georgia and Texas were passing election integrity legislation. In both those situations, corporate leaders foolishly decided to weigh in on the side of the far left, and they were roundly punished for it, both by consumers, but also just humiliation, as a lot of the things that the far left advocated for either hurt their own businesses, like defunding the police, which led to a huge shoplifting epidemic, or just turned out to be false, flat out false, like when the Major League Baseball pulled the All-Star game from Denver and moved it from Atlanta to Denver, where they actually had fewer voting rights and days to vote than they were going to have in Georgia after the election integrity legislation. So I think what this statement suggests, if you look at the neutrality of it, the sort of even-handedness of it, corporations have had their hands burned on that stove over and over and over again, and I think they have learned their lesson.
Okay, you're saying they were punished for the position that they took years ago. Can you speak to the specifics of the impact for our viewers? How were they burned?
Well, certainly. Well, like I said before, some of the consequences of the positions that they themselves advocated for greatly were deleterious to their position. For example, the movement to defund the police after the death of George Floyd led to a huge rise in crime, particularly shoplifting, that hurt a lot of the brick and mortar retailers that had signed on to statements in support of the far left defund the police position or had given money to BLM. In addition, it was a huge hit to their brand. And to be fair, we played a significant role in that, calling out with major seven-figure ad campaigns corporations that went woke to distract from their own misdeeds in the market or their mistreatment of their customers. So part of it was because of a backlash of conservative activism saying, listen, corporations need to focus on serving their customers, not on far-left woke politics.
Okay, so, what do you attribute to this change? You're saying this new letter, its tone is rather neutral. How did this come to happen now compared to years ago?
Well, I think one of the things that's rapidly shifted over the last 4 to 5 years is the large asset managers like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard that used to avowedly push these corporations and their boards in a woke left direction have now themselves been stung by a number of actions from state attorney generals, the federal government. We're seeing a ton of EOs come against, pushing back against ESG and a lot of the nonsense that woke asset managers were pushing. And so these corporations, these retail-facing corporations, don't have the cover that they did from people like Larry Fink at BlackRock 5 years ago. And so part of it is the corporations themselves have been hurt by some of their previous positions, but also they don't have some of the asset managers that hold a ton of their stock as stewards for pension funds and institutional investors covering for them. So you see companies a lot more reticent to take far left positions.
Okay, well, I'll just ask one more question on this. I'll stop pulling on the thread after this. But why do you think Larry Fink changed his position?
Well, like I said, a big part of that is that there were a ton of actions taken by state legislators in mostly Republican states and even states attorneys general. For example, Ken Paxton in Texas and joined by 11 other states attorney general are currently suing State Street, BlackRock, and Vanguard for intervening in the coal market, pushing so-called net zero incentives that decrease the production of coal. That's just one area in which woke politics was pushed by asset managers that led to corporations down the chain going in that direction. But these asset managers have been feeling the sting of sort of retribution for those kind of activities, and so they have been pushing a lot less of that woke activism into the corporate America.
Okay, well, so in the letter, the companies are calling for local, state, and federal officials to work together following the fatal shooting of the 37-year-old. Can I just get your comments on the protests here? What is the path to de-escalation?
Well, I think the letter made some good points, and what we seen right after that was that the state, local, and federal leaders did just that. Governor Walz and Mayor Frey called President Trump and conceded that they would allow local law enforcement that had been specifically not cooperating with ICE, requiring support from federal officials, that they would end that policy, and that local police would protect ICE as they're going about doing their job. So to that extent, you could say that the letter was successful in pressuring state and local leaders to step up and enforce the law as is their responsibility under their job duties.
And how big of a role would you say do state and local leaders play in reducing tensions in Minnesota?
I mean, I think they're the bulk of it. I mean, unless we're going to say that federal officials are not allowed to enforce the law in states where the governor says otherwise, which of course was litigated in the Civil War, and that's a done issue. Then state and local leaders are going to have to comply with federal officials, and when they leave federal officials at the whims of far left radical violent activists, it leads to the kinds of escalations that we're seeing here. So it was great to see Governor Walz and Mayor Frey finally step up to their job duties as elected officials, as governor, as mayor of these places. Their job is to enforce law and order and to support the federal officials who are enforcing federal law.
Okay, well, just quickly, one last thing. President Trump said he had a good call with Governor Walz and sending 3 requests. Do you think we'll see changes on the ground?
Yeah, I think we already have. I mean, just for example, the protests in front of some of the hotels where the ICE agents are staying were just declared illegal gatherings because they're obviously meant to intimidate federal officials from doing their jobs. And they've already been on the process of being cleared by local law enforcement. That was not something that was happening just a few days ago. So it does seem like state, local, and federal officials are finally working hand in hand to enforce the law and let ICE go about its business of removing violent criminals from the Minneapolis and Minnesota area.
All right, Will, really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.